Well, I'm Rachel Wightman, and I recently wrote the book Faith and Fake News, A Guide to Consuming Information Wisely. My full-time job, I work as the Associate Director for Instruction and Outreach at the library at Concordia University, St. Paul, and have been a librarian for just over 15 years, I think. And I also, on the side, at part-time, work with churches and teach workshops on basically consuming information wisely, the intersection of faith and misinformation. And that's kind of where this book kind of came out of. And then when I'm not working and doing all of those other things, I live in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. So at this time of year, I'm enjoying getting outside since the weather has finally turned from winter to spring. So.
Yeah, good. My name is Mike Austin. The book that I just recently co-edited and published with Erdman's is called QAnon, Chaos and the Cross, Christianity and Conspiracy Theories. And my job, I'm a professor of philosophy at Eastern Kentucky University. I think I'm starting my 20th year, which is just weird. But I teach a lot of philosophy classes, teach some classes in the honors program. And most of my writing and do a little bit of speaking are on ethical issues or things related to cultivating character, virtue, those sorts of things, with particular focus on Christian sort of virtue formation. But yeah, besides that, well, I used to coach soccer. I just retired. I'd coached for about 20 years, last 6 or 7, a high school team in town. So I'm going to have a bunch more free time, but hang out with my wife. We're empty nesters now, so we're enjoying that, spend time with people in our church community and just kind of hanging out. So yeah, and hopefully, like you said, getting outside because the weather's beautiful right now.
I feel like a day like end of May for us, at least in Minnesota, we walk outside and we go, this is why we live here.
Yeah, for that little slice, right, of the perfect weather. Yeah. Well, let's jump in. We'll start talking about the books. I'll ask. First question is just why did you think or feel like your book, Faith and Fake News, what sort of motivated you to start this project? And probably especially in our current cultural climate, there's a lot of stuff, but what brought it about?
Yeah, well, like I said, this sort of came out of the workshops that I was doing with churches. I started doing those in 2020. And actually, I started kind of offering that at my own church, a workshop on this idea of misinformation and helping the people in my church navigate information. So I'm a librarian. I have my master's degree in information and library science. And that's kind of how the lens I see the world, right? Is like, how do we look at information? How do we access it? How do we navigate it? How do we use it wisely? How do we, to your point, how do we use it ethically, really? Like, how are we being ethical with information? And in 2019, I was just noticing a theme around me of people in my church community, like really struggling with like, particularly thinking of the election in 2020 of like, how do I find good information about what politicians are talking about? And so I started offering this workshop, and then COVID happened. And then everything in the Twin Cities, especially around George Floyd being killed, that kind of sparked a lot more conversations in my community. And so I was able to continue offering that class again at my church. And the fact that we were doing that was picked up by a couple different news outlets, because I think this idea that a church would offer training on like, how do you find truth online was really unusual. And it just kind of grew from there, just offering these workshops. And then out of that came this book. And I'm excited about it because I think it will provide people with that content more than I could reach just doing these workshops at churches around the country. I hope that in our current climate, right, where we have so much information coming at us, it's really hard, I think, for people to navigate their online spaces, whether that's social media, it's news, it's online on their laptop or their phone. I hope that this just really gives people tools to navigate that well and to be truth seekers, right? That's what I think the Christian faith is about, is finding truth. But then how do we respond, and how do we love people well? How do we respond in a way that's not just spreading more misinformation, spreading conspiracy theories? Because our online spaces are so emotional, I think people often get sucked into that. And so providing them with tools and space to really slow down and be a little bit more mindful in this climate that we live in, this current cultural climate of kind of, it feels very chaotic, to use the word from the other book, and it can feel very overwhelming. And so my hope is that given like the world that we live in, this can be a tool to help people really slow down and maybe be a little bit more mindful.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, that's good. And I think like the subtitle of your book, To Consuming Information Wisely, it sounds like that's what you described as sort of description of that. The takeaway for your readers is, equipping them to do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's my hope.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about this other book, which I know you edited and I had the opportunity to submit a chapter for, but it would be really great to hear a little bit more about your process of selecting contributors and kind of what sparked the idea for you to even be a part of that project. Because I think it goes they're both so related in terms of their topics.
Yeah. It was kind of weird how it came about. I had a friend of mine who's not involved with the book, a Christian publisher, had approached him about like a single authored book on this and he didn't feel like he could do that. And so I interacted with that publisher a little bit, and I just thought, there's so much here. I couldn't write a book by myself on this. I just didn't know enough. So then another guy, actually Greg Bach, the co-editor, we started talking about it. We'd have conversations before. He uses conspiracy theories as a theme in one of his a critical thinking class in philosophy that he does. And so we decided to put together a proposal. And it was interesting. We didn't have here are 20 topics we want to have covered, and we had kind of brainstormed some, but we basically just contacted people we knew that we thought might have something to say, and then got referrals from people we knew. So sometimes, at least in philosophy, you just send out this general call for papers, and we didn't do that. But yeah, it really came together nicely. And so there were, like your chapter is an example of Trevor Thompson at Erdman's, right? He suggested it because we were looking for something just exactly what you're doing. And so that's how we came to have your chapter in, which filled an important gap, because that's the main way these things get propagated and communicated. So yeah, we were really, some of the stuff that people came up with, we couldn't even imagine having in the book, but theologians, biblical scholars, philosophers, information experts like yourself, some communications professors, people who are also pastors, not just academics. So it's kind of it's meant to be practical. And yeah, I think our hope is, it's tough because these conversations, whether it's about fake news or conspiracy theories, can be really difficult. If somebody's really sort of deeply believes in maybe a particular theory like QAnon, a simple 5 or 10 minute conversation is not going to necessarily do the trick. But we wanted to equip people just to think about this stuff from a Christian perspective to begin with, but have some practical tools as they engage these theories in their own lives, or if they have loved ones or friends or coworkers, some tools to how can I do this in a way that's loving, but also, wise and faithful. So I think that's good. And for me, I didn't know as much about the details of QAnon and I'd forgotten about the history of conspiracies and pseudo conspiracies in the Christian church. So I learned a lot from the contributors. Feel like that it came together well.
Yeah, I'm excited about that book as well, because as I was putting together resources for these workshops that I teach, I found that it was really hard to find a lot of materials that kind of cross between the Christian world and then this misinformation and conspiracy theories. There's a lot for both, but it was hard for me to find a lot of resources. And when I go to churches, people often ask oh, do you know of something for this? And I could often point them to really great resources, which I happily did, but they weren't always from a faith perspective, which is fine. But it is nice to have some resources like that.